Okay, hello everyone. This is EEG review video for week 3. This week we're looking at specifically focal abnormalities. So you can expect to find a focal abnormality in this EEG and in EEG number 5, which you are going to review. This is EEG number 4, so I will go through this in its entirety, um, picking out the important aspects of this EEG. And again, in an effort to hopefully, for your benefit, to better explain um, focal abnormalities, but how to go through these EEGs and do your own review, and use montages and change montages that help bring out activity the best. So why don't we get started here? Um, as always, it's a good idea to first take a look at the patient history and get some information. So we pull up the study information. We know that this patient is a 34-year-old female. All right. It's an outpatient, so the patient walked into the office. This patient's on a seizure medication, Depakote. So that gives us a little bit of an indication as to what the history may be in the next page. So you take Depakote because you have a seizure disorder. So let's take a look. So the history sometimes is a little brief, but we can get enough out of this. So again, 34-year-old complains of seizures consisting of an aura of thought that aren't hers and fears. Okay, seizures consisted of I think this would be grand mal seizures, loss of consciousness, convulsions, tongue biting, urinary incontinence lasting 1 to 1.5 minutes. And after episodes, patient felt weak, difficulty with their short-term memory, and tired. Patient fell back to sleep after an hour. Okay, so this portion here is what you would expect after a grand mal seizure in the postictal period. Okay. She slept 6 hours the night before, and the previous EEG showed no significant abnormalities. Okay, and that looks like to be about 2 years before this current EEG. This EEG was done in 2000. The previous EEG was done in 2009. This EEG is done in excuse me. The previous EEG is done in 2007. This EEG was done in 2009. So about a 2-year difference. Okay, so based on this history, what we would expect to see if the patient had a true seizure disorder, and if she had an active EEG, would be maybe epileptiform discharges of some sort. Also, patient with temporal lobe epilepsy, we'd specifically expect to see focal discharges in the temporal lobes coming from coming from the temporal regions. All right, so let's start reviewing this EEG. First off, our impedance check looks good for the electrodes that we put on. Quick note, auxiliary 3 and 4 is where we put EKG. Aux 1 is generally where that's our reference electrode. And everything else here is standard. And PG1 and PG2 is actually T1 and T2. Okay, anterior temporal leads. And impedance check is good. And real good. It's tested at 5K ohms. And again, if you double click this, you can pull up the impedance check itself if you wanted to look at specific electrode impedances. All right. Again, quickly, just this is a nice calibration page. This is what I like to see. Each channel is deflecting appropriately, and they're all equal. There's not one that is too high or too low. Occasionally, what you'll see is if you had a bad amplifier, one would be completely flat. So that's what you really want to look out for, is any deviation where one is looking higher, lower, flat, obviously, than the others. All right, again, we start with an A1, A2 reference, IPSI ear reference. Reason for that, again, is we can quickly check symmetry against homologous electrodes. Homologous electrode would mean F3 compared to F4, right? Same area, just different hemispheres. C3, C4, P3, P4, okay? And at a quick visual look, if you just compared each two channels, everything looks symmetric. Okay, so we don't have any significant asymmetry here. What we do see is a nice alpha background. There's a lot of alpha coming out throughout the majority of these channels. And what you want to do is, when you know the patient is fully awake, especially usually at the beginning of the study, is to check to make sure that the background is reactive, meaning that it attenuates with eye opening and returns with eye closure. So here's a very brief eye opening, eye closure, but this works for our purposes here. You can see that there is attenuation, especially in this area right here. Okay, and you have your eye blink artifact. Helps prove that the eye stayed open as well. So you have your attenuation, and then when the eyes close right here, your alpha background returns. So what we can do is get a quick count. You could use your waveform tool if you wanted to, but really what you should be able to do is count these. You get the frequency by counting how many you find in 1 second. And obviously 1 second is from one major grid line to the next major grid line. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 hertz. That's a nice, beautiful alpha background, okay? So that's definitely one thing that needs to go into all of your reports, is defining how this background is reactive or not reactive to eye opening, eye closure, and define frequency. And also get excuse me, I'm just putting my markers here. You want to get a voltage gradient as well. So if we were measuring this waveform from the bottom to the top, we get a voltage of 48 microvolts. And as I mentioned in the first video, is get a couple and try to get a range. And this one's 52 microvolts, so you just want to get a range of the background. There is some beta to be seen. It's low voltage, but you can still comment on that in your, and you can also, get voltages for those as well. All right, I'm going to turn off the tool. I'm going to just keep scrolling ahead. Okay, so as we're scrolling along, we're going to see if we see any major changes, any significant abnormalities, which again, just because we have a little hint, you might want to look at the temporal areas. But that being said, also when you look at the EEG, just sort of have an overall view for anything that might jump out. All right, so we changed montages here to anterior to posterior, bipolar, and again we have a left parasagittal, left temporal, left parasagittal, midline, right parasagittal, and right temporal. And what this is actually often called is a double banana montage, because if you link these together and you draw it out, it actually looks like a double banana. Maybe I can draw that on this tech head here. It won't let me draw, unfortunately. But if you were to link these together, that would be one banana, and then if you drew a line over these, that would be another banana. Just in case you ever heard that term, double banana, that's why they call it that. Okay, anyway, so we are looking at the AP bipolar montage. We have nice alpha. The EEG looks very symmetric, very beautiful EEG right here. patient's eyes are requested open here. Oh, one quick thing. So at the beginning of every montage, what you should be doing, and what the text recording this test should be doing, is naming a couple things, three things really, major things. Noting whether the patient's eyes are open or closed, and they're closed. Patient state, which I disagree with here. This says drowsy. This is why I say you can't always go with what the tech notes say. Patient's clearly awake. We have a nice alpha background. We have even little eye blinks here. All of the eyes are closed, but little eye blinks. Patient's awake, and then the body position. This is supine, which means on the back, and the head. And for the most part, this is always patient's always on the back. But I mean, you could have an inpatient that was laying on their right or left side. That's important to note. And the head position is straight. And the reason for the head position and why that's important to note is if the patient's laying flat on, and the head is straight, then any movement, cough, any head movement artifact would be sort of limited to the occipital leads, and it depends on actually what they're laying on. If you put them on a neck roll, you're apt to have less artifact from the occipital leads versus a pillow. But if the patient was laying on their left side and they started to move around, then you'd expect some artifact more on the temporal leads. So that's why that's important to note. And artifacts of different kinds, not just head movement from moving their legs or their neck, but even respiratory artifact. All right, so we have another example of eye opening and eye closure. Here in this lab, we request that they do it both on the reference and the AP bipolar. All right, this TTP is talking to patient. But eye opening, we do have, if you compare the EEG, like say here to here, you can clearly see a nice attenuation of the background. Eye blinks artifacts throughout eye opening. And right here is your eye closure, and you have the return of the background. Okay. All right, so moving into this page, I see the first thing that catches my eye that we haven't seen yet is right here. Okay, and what catches my eye here is that we have a slow wave, this theta wave. It looks a bit suspicious. Okay, it's asymmetric because we don't have it over here on the left. So this is where I was pointing out last week that asymmetry is really a key component to finding abnormalities and defining abnormalities. And that's sort of what you learn to train your eye, is comparing left and right side. So here you see a nice a theta wave, and you don't see it here, so it's an asymmetry. So now we have something to, unless we see significant changes, something to keep our eye on. And it's actually kind of subtle here, but we'll see what happens. All right, maybe a little something over here, but sometimes you can overcall alpha itself, so I'm actually going to let this one go. But still, you might say, well, is this an eye movement? No. See, what we have here now is a little bit of a phase reversal, and maybe even equal potential at F8 and T4. So we have a slow wave going up here, kind of flattened here, and then one down here. Okay, so this is a negative potential because they're going towards each other, and it's negative at F8 T4, and this is a negative slow focus right here on the right anterior mid-temporal. Okay, try my quick. Oh, I don't want the clip note. Anyway, I'm just going to try to highlight this, see if it comes out any nicer, but right here. Okay, and they're very subtle, but even here there's a little bit. Alright, so the patient's going to start HV. We do that for 3 minutes. HV HV is performed to help bring out abnormalities, sometimes dependent on how good their effort is. The B's here let you know how quickly their respiration rate is. So every time they take a breath in, the tech puts a B. And what you typically see is some amount of what we call buildup, which is a buildup of slow activity. It's when the vessels in the brain actually start to constrict because of the high level of oxygen in the blood. Okay. Nothing too significant here, just scrolling along. Not an eye movement artifact. Okay. "120 seconds, that's we have 1 minute to go. The tech right here is encouraging the patient, which you should do if the patient's not giving their best effort, that you know that they could do better. A little bit of a build up here from before. This could actually be a little bit of our abnormality coming out here. Not so much here, right? This is where we saw it before. This time T6 and O2 a little bit more in that field. Still appears to be F8T4. I would say a mild buildup of on HV in this patient's swallow. A little bit of a buildup in here. Buildup meaning increased slow due to HV. Alright, so the tech gave the patient a good effort, and post HV is performed for 2 minutes, and we do that. We give them 2 minutes for the EEG to return to baseline. Okay, we see a little something here on the left again, right. If I've been saying left this whole time, I'm going to shoot myself. On the right, okay. It's typical in EEG to have left-right confusion. Okay. Again, more example of slow on the right, not the left. All right, I'm going to page through now a little bit more. All right, one minute. Interesting here. This is a little bit different than we had before. This is not just a slow wave, but a little bit of a sharp component here. So this could be a little bit of a sharp transient right there. Something to keep our eye on there, because it looks like there's a sharp with a little bit of a wave following it. A better example of slow. This is probably the best example so far of the focal slow. And before it was theta, this is almost more of a delta range. This is a little more suspicious here, because if this is real, it could be a sharp leading into what this slow here. I'm moving ahead though. Moving ahead. The patient's, I can see it right here. If we can get my page to scroll. Getting drowsy, okay? Right here we start to see a little bit of a waxing and waning of the alpha. Alpha, no alpha. Alpha, no alpha. Okay, so now it's waxing, waning. This is early drowsiness. Here you should see a clear asymmetry on the right compared to the left. And it's very suspicious looking. I'll tell you, we have. I think that there's a sharp wave leading this little slow component. Let's see what happens. Okay, we're going to the transverse. Transverse is a nice montage to record sleep in, because you get a nice vertex wave crossing at CZ. But as far as our lab goes, this is the next montage in the run. Now this is interesting here. Now we expect to see our activity on the right. So when you have to readjust the way you conceptualize your montage now. So every instance where every run starts on the left, ends on the right, right? Starts on the left, F7, ends on the right, F8. So we knew that before, based on what I was saying, that F8 and T4 were the most likely culprits. Well, look at what we have here. We have F8 in these two channels, and we have T4 here. And notice the asymmetry. So if this is the left side, looking at around T3, compared to the right, you can see that we have this, I'm going to go ahead and say sharp and a slow. Whether these are truly, if this is a sharp, slow complex is maybe a little too early to say that, but this is, appears to be a sharp wave here. All right, but definitely a slow focus and a clear asymmetry. And now that we know what we're looking for, as we scroll through this transverse montage, you can start to see them come out here and there, right? Theta range. Well, drowsiness is definitely helping to bring out this abnormality, which is typically the case with the temporal lobe epilepsy. There's some debate about it, but I've always found that sleep brings out sharp and spike waves a little better early drowsiness, stage 2. All right. A little more of the same, although this looks a little more sharp here. A little bit more. Definitely deeper drowsiness. Let's see if we can get some examples of some vertex waves here in a minute. Patient's back awake here in arousal. Patient actually says she's feeling cold, so that'll disrupt any drowsiness at this point. Patient moving. Artifact. This is a pop. Mirror image specific to O1, most likely due to movement. Yep, covered with a blanket. Okay, let's see what we get. I'm just going to speed through this a little bit. Now we're on the T1, T2. I don't know if I have time to fully explain T1, T2, but again, it really helps bring out temporal lobe abnormalities. And what you can see is you can clearly see the asymmetry from the left to the right. But if you look at this run right here, FP2 to O2, that is your right temporal anterior posterior bipolar montage. If you were looking at this wave right here, okay, I mean we can clearly see that this is a discharge. This is a it could be a spike, but it's brought out a little bit more detail here, and that's due to some double distance between the T1, which is is on the left anterior, compared to T2. So you have no input at T1 and full input at T2. I say input voltages, which are nicely shown here. All right. Now here we have almost a little bit of a rhythmic run of the abnormality, and rhythmic meaning I'm going to go ahead and we can start calling these epileptiform discharges, because what we have is a sort of a discharge and a slow component following it, and that is really the key to an epileptiform discharge, is that you have the spike or the sharp wave followed by a slow wave. And that's, if you just look at, say, this example here, you have this sharp and then a slow wave. We have phase reversals between T2 and T4 here, and phase reversals between F8 and T4 here. So same region that we were discussing earlier, coming out a little bit more so now that the patient is getting into drowsiness. Okay, and now we're getting into the Laplacian montage. What we'd expect to see in the Laplacian, um, as I mentioned in the previous video, is that the Laplacian montage is great for focal abnormalities, and not so great for a encephalopathy or a generalized slow or um, generalized low voltage EEG. But very, very, very good for a focal abnormality, because what it will do is really bring out the true voltage due to some averaging of the electrodes around the electrode, really showing the focus of an event. So let's see if we can pull out any examples of that. All right, so what we were, based on what I said before and the polarity that we saw before, we were expecting F8 and T4 to be the focus of our epileptiform discharges. What we can see is here and here we have a sharp and a wave. Okay, I know this doesn't look all that sharp in this right here, but that's what we have. Now let's just quickly change this to an AP bipolar, and you can see that this is the same activity as we saw before, right? I'll change this actually to T1, T2, and you can see it here, right? And when we put it into Laplacian, it really shows us where that focus is at T4 and T8. So that's, I just showed you an example of how to use your different montages to help you pull up, the activity, pull out the activity the best, so to represent it the best, to show it the best. All right. So quickly, some photic. I think I have to go back to as recorded. Yes. Okay. So we'll see if there's any significant here. Excuse me. Anything significant here in photic. A little bit of driving. No, that's a little bit too anterior. All right. Nothing too significant yet. Probably a little bit here at 7. It's fairly unremarkable photic. I don't see any really great driving, so maybe a little bit here at 21, believe it or not. Yeah, probably a little bit here at 20 as well. So there is some driving. What you would do in your report is just sort of mark at what frequencies you found driving to be fine driving, and you could make, whether it's, discuss how remarkable it is or unremarkable it is. Okay, so let's follow up on this review. So what we found is basically we had a patient with a history of temporal lobe epilepsy, and there's a short description of a seizure that she had. The seizure sounds as though it was a focal seizure, which secondarily generalized into a generalized tonic-clonic seizure, which is typical for temporal lobe epilepsy. You have a focal onset that begins in the temporal lobe and then spreads to the rest of the brain, creating a generalized seizure. And next semester you'll have some examples, some seizure examples of a focal secondarily generalized. In any case, so what we found is that this patient does have a right anterior temporal seizure or focus. There are times where we have anterior temporal, right temporal focal slow, but when the patient got into drowsiness early, well, we can't even say stage 2, just late drowsiness, we saw some good examples of some epileptiform discharges focal, again at F8 and T4. So this EEG confirms that the patient does have a epileptic focus, a seizure focus, and obviously as far as the Depakote goes, I guess that would be up to the doctor to decide whether the regimen needs to be changed, or if That obviously would depend on um, the seizure frequency um, that the patient had even prior going on to the Depakote. Um, Confirms obviously the reason that the patient is on the Depakote. So I think that'll conclude this review. You know how to get in touch with me. Please do if you have any questions about this EEG. I will be posting a quiz on Thursday, like I did last week. That will just go over. I'll just put some questions to go over some of the highlights and critical teaching points that I feel are important from this review. With that, I will end. So good luck, and I hope you found this very helpful. Thanks.